again, good afternoon, everyone. So my name is Ruba Ayyad, and I teach English and communication courses at Bethlehem University in Palestine, in Bethlehem in Palestine. And my expertise, like in gender, human rights, and how they intersect with globalization and communication as well. So in today's presentation, I will explain how podcasting helps transform learning in today's digital era, and how I was able to use this tool in my one of my courses last semester. So I'll briefly talk about the changes that we all have experienced as educators and the impact of these changes on today's learners, and then you guys will be able to hear very short part of a podcast that was created by one of my students, and then we will talk about the benefits of this amazing tool, and then how to include, or how I would say, to incorporate this in your classrooms as well. So, and if you have any questions, please ask at the end of my presentation. Now, um, obviously, as we all know, in today's digital era, education is constantly changing and it is constantly evolving, which is due to the technological advancement and developments that we now have. And these changes also impact the way learners are also learning. And it's very important for us as educators to embrace these changes and these advancements, and also to take advantage of these technological developments that we now have. And not only our, I would say, traditional top-down approaches may not meet the needs of today's learners, but also we need to make sure that we take advantage of these advancements simply because they allow students to be active learners in the process, in the learning process. So transitioning from top-down teacher-centered approaches, podcasting allows students to be active agents in their learning, and also allows them to, I would say, podcasting allows students to work on their communication skill and enhance their critical analysis skills as well. So it was very important for me as an educator to make sure that my students are active, and to make sure that when I engage with them in the classroom, that they are giving me more than what I give them. So what is a podcast, or what is podcasting? Obviously, a podcast is a digital medium content that relates to a specific topic or specific theme. And it's an extremely engaging and dynamic tool that allows students to bridge the theoretical concepts that they learn in the class with practical applications, or to real life scenarios. So it allows them to apply the knowledge that they are, or that they learned in the class. And again, I'm going to keep saying this today, the whole point of including or incorporating this tool or this method is to make sure that my students are active agents and they are producers instead of recipients. And not only that, but through through podcasts, or creating a podcast episode or episodes, students cover a diversity of content and topics. And this, in a way, promotes inclusivity in the learning. And I made sure that the students took charge of choosing their own topics. So they chose topics that they felt that they were really interested in, or they just really preferred discussing this topic further. And also in their podcast, or while they were creating their podcast, it was very important for me to make sure that they were analyzing real life cases, or to make sure that the students were able to use examples from real life, because the whole point of this strategy is to make sure that the students are applying what they have learned in the class with practical applications, and to make sure that they use the theories that we have discussed in the class as the foundation for their podcasts. So this assignment was incorporated in one of my courses that I teach, which was gender and communication course. Now, in the gender and communication course that is offered to third year students, we basically talk about the intersection of gender and communication and how our perception of gender impacts the way we speak to each other and impacts our communication patterns, and how stereotypes are created through language simply because of the social construction of gender. Not only that, I kind of push the boundaries a bit by discussing like topics that are, I would say, a bit taboo or sensitive, that are not really discussed in the Palestinian society or in any conservative society. So each student, and one thing that I want to say is that the students that I taught were all females. So each student was tasked with creating her own podcast episode lasting from 12 to 15 minutes. And each student had to choose a specific gender issue that they felt that it isn't really discussed in our society. So in order for them to create their own podcast episode, they had to do a lot of research. They had to gather and analyze the information that they have found, and they also, some of them, were able to conduct interviews with relevant individuals in their communities. So it was a lot of work. But one thing that I want to say is that this was something that they have never done before. It was the first time, at least for me as well as an educator, where I introduced this strategy. And for them, it was the first time where they had to create their own podcast episode or any digital content where they had to address a very sensitive issue. So right now you will watch, you're going to listen to a short part of a podcast that was created by one of my students. And please, if you cannot really hear the audio, please let me know.
The sound of a young woman's screams breaks the stillness in a Palestinian home, where the scents of home cooked food and tradition mix harmoniously. Imagine, if you will, a scene in which the exact structure intended to provide care and protection falls apart. A father's affection transforms into something unsettling, and a brother's bond turns into a chain. The father shouted with a dark look on his face, saying, "You are ruining the reputation of our family, Bint. Your actions will have consequences." The brother answering, "Yaba, let me break her legs so she will know her worth." "I just wanted to be me," Aisha responds. "I just wanted to be like any other normal girl. Why must the pain be so intense?" And the father gives Aisha a face slap that causes her lip to bleed before she can say anything else. Imagine that Aisha is experiencing internal agony in addition to the hits. Even though these are hypothetical statements, they reflect the harsh reality that some Palestinian women live in. All too often, oppressive heat, the feeling of helplessness, and actual suffering are too common in Palestinian societies. In fact, according to the UNFPA Palestine website, 59% of Palestinian women have experienced domestic violence, with physical violence being one of the forms of this violence.
So I don't know if you have noticed, but the student, was able to change her tone of voice to match the seriousness of the topic that she is talking about. And obviously, when we talk about domestic abuse, this is something that happens in the private. So it's not really talked about in conservative societies. And the point of this, I would say, this podcast episode is to invite others to start thinking about what is happening in the private. And one thing that she did successfully is she used the verb imagine more than once. And the point of using the verb imagine is that she invites us as listeners to imagine, or to, I would say, mentally picture this scenario. And it's very important for us when we discuss topics such as domestic abuse to think of or is not think of, but to make sure that we break the divide between the private and the public. So when she uses the verb imagine, she is asking you as a listener to put your shoes in, to put yourself in the shoes of the person or the female who is being abused by her father. And she used one word in Arabic, which is yaba, and it means father or my dad. And one thing that to add is that in a podcast, we don't really have like content within our hand. Like it's not an essay, it's not a report that we can read. So it's, we can only just listen. So it's very important to make sure that every single word is engaging and informative, because the last thing that we want, or the students would, the last thing that the student wanted is um, to create a podcast that is very boring, or a podcast where the listener cannot really relate to what is being discussed. So this assignment, the students were able to learn a lot of skills. And not only that, again, I said this earlier, it was extremely important for me to make sure that my students are active and they're engaged. And for this assignment, I realized that they were highly engaged, highly motivated, because they were in charge. Each student chose a specific topic that she was really interested in, or a topic that she felt that was not really discussed or talked about. And by doing this, students were talking about, or they were brainstorming, honestly, every single class. This is what they wanted to, this is, they kept saying, like, this is what I want to talk about. This is the example that I want to include. And this is something that I have not really seen in any other assignment. So I actually saw how engaged and active they were as well. And this transformed them into active and creators of knowledge rather than being passive recipients. So they were able to create a content that does not really exist in the Palestinian society. And not only that, but they this enhanced their communication skills, because they had to create a script, but they also they had to make sure that they focus on their tone of voice, what kind of sound effects to include, and to make sure that the language that they use evokes emotion, and the language that they use is extremely informative and clear as well. Another, I would say, importance is obviously cultural significance. As I said, in the Palestinian society or in any conservative society, addressing or coming up with content that addresses overlooked or taboo or sensitive issues such as early marriage or abuse or gender based violence is extremely challenging because of the cultural and traditional norms that we have. So the students were able to break, honestly, these cultural barriers and traditions by creating these podcast episodes where they specifically chose topics that are not really addressed or talked about enough, or topics that are considered taboo. Like if you mention gender based violence in front of someone, they're going to be like, why are we discussing this? Females have equal rights in the society, and I think we all know that this is not the case. So and by creating these podcast episodes, they filled gaps in the media or in the Palestinian media, and they sparked meaningful conversations, and they were able to create content that honestly does not exist, and they were able to create content that is extremely needed. And their podcast episodes are available for other students to listen to, for other teachers, or anyone who is just interested in learning more about these kind of topics as well. Not only that, but the students learned a lot of practical skills, and one of them is script writing. So, with script writing, students learned how to craft compelling narratives, and to make sure, and they learned how to, I would say, structure their ideas effectively to make sure that listeners are engaged with their content. And they also focused on using language that evokes emotion. And I said this earlier, it's very important to focus on the script, simply because as someone who is listening to the audio, I can only use my ears. That's it. So they had to use language that ensured that as the listener is listening to them, they are completely engaged as well. And to use language that evokes certain emotion. It could be sadness, could be anger, it could be empathy, and that depended on their the topic that they have chosen. And they also learned a lot of recording and editing skills, because I would say like students learned hands-on experience with audio recording, recording equipment, and how to minimize, and they learned how to minimize background noise, and how to set up the microphone, and also how to edit their audio, and how to change or how to include sound effect, and also how to include music as well. And as I said, some of them were able to conduct interviews. So this is something that they also had to learn as well, is how to conduct interviews with individuals in their communities, or who are aware, I won't say not aware, but who have knowledge about the topics that they were discussing in their podcast as well. So they learned how to write questions, I would say compelling questions, or questions that are direct, and questions where they will get the answer that they wanted as well. So, how do we incorporate podcasting into our teaching? And I think honestly, it does not, I would say, regardless of your student's level or their age, podcasting can be adapted to meet their needs. And honestly, what I would say is that make sure that the students are choosing their own topics. This is extremely important. And I felt the students were highly motivated and engaged, because I allowed them to choose topics that they felt were really important, or topics that they were really interested in. And the topics that they could choose obviously have to align with the objectives of the course, and the topics could be related to current events, or I would say the course's theme or objectives. So for younger, I would say younger students, podcasting can be used to enhance their language through storytelling. And for older students, if you're teaching high school students, podcasting can be used to discuss topics in depth, especially because the last thing that you want is for students to keep writing essays or reports. So instead of doing that, why not use podcasting instead of just giving them assignment where they have to just write an essay or a report or an article. Another thing is, again, depends on the level of the students and their age. There's so many formats that they can choose from. They could conduct interviews, it could be storytelling, it even could be co-hosted as well, or panel discussion, or narrative, especially if this is the first time you introduce this strategy to, or this tool to your student. They can work together and create their own podcast episode. And one thing that I encourage is just work with them on brainstorming. So maybe during the class, like you can work with them on how to outline the episode's content. So maybe what questions to answer, what topics to cover, or even like what kind of sounds effects to include, what music, what is the what are the best terminologies to include in the podcast. And one of the things that I found really interesting is that the students were so excited to hear each other's episodes or podcast episodes, simply because each student had to choose a different or a specific topic that they were really interested in. Obviously, it has to be gender related. So they used Audacity. This is a free audio editing software that is suitable for students, and it's free as well. And they found it extremely easy to navigate as well. Canva, the students loved Canva, and they used Canva to design their podcast covers. And then we listened to a lot of podcasts, and one of them was an unladylike. So obviously, because this is a gender and communication course, and we were discussing a lot of gender issues, we listened to a lot of podcasts from unladylike, because they were discussing issues that are related to gender and stuff you should know or brains on, especially if you are teaching younger students. Stuff you should know and brains on, sorry, is great if they want to learn more about, I would say, science. And or stuff you should know basically includes a lot of information about honestly anything. So it's very important to make sure that the students listen to other podcasts in order, I would say, to get inspired from the podcast that they listen to, and just to look at the structure of the podcast, because obviously um, it's all about script writing. In order for them to create a successful podcast episode, they had to learn how to write a successful script as well. Now, to conclude, I just want to wrap up by saying that for me as an educator, it's very, very important to make sure that my students are empowered, to make sure that my students are active in their learning. And I felt like this really, really empowered and students. And honestly, it really raised their confidence level. And when I told them, like, you will be creating content that honestly does not exist in the Palestinian society or even sometimes in any conservative society. So they also took in charge of every single detail. Obviously, had to approve, but they chose their titles, they chose their topics, and they chose the people who they wanted to interview, the sound effects, the music, what music to include, the language to include as well. And so they felt like this is the first assignment where it was student centered, not teacher centered. And again, as an educator, I saw how this assignment or this strategy really promoted, enhanced, I would say, their critical skills. And then they were able to apply what we discussed in the class. And they took advantage of the theories that we discussed and the theories that they have read about. And then they used those theories as the foundation for their podcast episodes. So again, I really encourage you to look at the possibilities of incorporating podcasting in your classroom, and it's a great tool to empower students and to step away from these, I would say, traditional top-down approaches where it is teacher-centered and not student centered as well. So thank you so much for listening to me. And if you have any questions, please go ahead.
Okay, thank you, Ruba, for your very, very interesting presentation. I hope you can hear me.
Yes, I can.
Okay. So I really enjoyed it. Yes, it's a new idea. I like listening to podcasts, but I never thought about using it in the classroom. Also, thank you for sharing the technological tools that you have used. I will try to do it with my students. I would like to ask you, what are some of the difficulties that you have faced when asking your students to use podcasts? Because one of the issues that I usually face with my students is that maybe some of them don't know how to use some applications. They don't know, for example, how to edit an audio. So, and sometimes it can be time consuming to really teach them such skills. So, and I think that we are all as teachers struggle with time management, and we always have limits. So I don't know how you have tried to go beyond such the barriers.
So again, because I was lucky enough, because this course is offered to third year students, and
Mhm.
at the university, at Bethlehem University, we have a great IT department where they do offer these services to the students and where they help them edit their audio. So honestly, I it was a great help simply because the students had access to services that helped them
Mhm.
edit their audios. But honestly, I would say if you are I would say including or incorporating if you want to incorporate podcasting, what you can do is let them work on shorter audios, because for mine they were a minimum of 12 to 15 minutes. You don't need to do that. What you can do is that if they are, let's say, new to audio recording or even like video recording, what you can do is start slowly. So maybe you can work together as a class, just create an activity where you brainstorm ideas, and as a teacher work with them and create one audio, and where you are in charge in a way, and then slowly teach them how to edit, especially if they don't have the services, where they can easily go to the IT department and they can help them with that. So what I can do is make sure that they have a really good script, because if their script is good, they don't really need to keep editing the audio, because if they have the script ready and the script is engaging and they know where to include the pauses as well, which is really important, because in a podcast it's very important to include pauses to make sure that as a listener we are or like as a podcast host, to make sure that the listener pays attention that after this pause, I added this pause to make sure that this information is important. So I feel like make sure that at least when you incorporate this assignment, it has to be teacher centered. You show them how to
Of
create an
course.
audio, or maybe like I would say like how to create a script and then an audio. And I feel like once you do that, it will become way easier for them to do that on their own. So a lot of work
Thank
on you,
you.
but
Thank
honestly,
Yeah.
you're gonna see how the students really felt empowered. They felt confident, and it was really interesting because I was a bit fearful, because I asked them like, talk about gender-based violence, talk about abuse, and then they were like, oh, we're a bit fearful. Like, what's gonna be the feedback? And I was like, no, I want you to understand that you are creating a content that does not exist. And
Exactly.
now, if let's say the students want to learn more about gender-based violence, they have a content that is available that is also created by students. So they felt empowered. They felt like they are now teaching other students about these kind of issues as well.
Thank you. Thank you very
You're
much. It
welcome.
was very interesting. I really enjoyed it.
Thank you
Thank you.
so much.